Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host Keith Crockford and today I am back with part two of the podcast that I started last week, where I just arrived in Cambodia. And last week I did our episode on Vietnam and talked about the trip that I was running with one of our bucket list groups through Vietnam and Cambodia. So part one last week was all about Vietnam. So if you've missed that one, please do head back and check out that episode. But this week I'm going to be talking about what we did in Cambodia. Now, last week, I had just come across the border and arrived in Phnom Penh and had the evening there. And we stayed in central Phnom Penh, which was a lovely hotel that we stayed in, lovely rooftop swimming pool. And we were only spending a very short time in Cambodia and both Phnom Penh and Seim Reap. So the majority of our trip we did spend in Vietnam. But in Cambodia, we were having 2 nights in Phnom Penh and then 3 nights in Seim Reap before we returned back to the UK. And I think if you want to kind of have you could spend a long time in Cambodia. And that's what I kind of got from this trip, was you could spend a lot longer there. But if you just want to go and see the main sites of Cambodia, then actually what we did was almost perfect. So for our second day that we had in Phnom Penh, we were heading, and it was going to be a very, very sobering day on this day. And I think it really did shock the group with what they learned on this day. And this day was all about the Khmer Rouge regime and looking at what had happened and the recent history that had happened. And I think the biggest issue that hit most people on this trip. Now, I'm 44 years old. I was born in 1980. I was the youngest member of the group that I had going around Vietnam and Cambodia. And the Khmer Rouge regime happened the year before I was born. So everybody on the trip, it had happened within their lifetime. And I think that was the bit that kind of got most people, was the fact that actually all of these things happened very, very recently. And we started our day off by visiting the S21 prison, which is now the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum. And it was very difficult to know what to do when you were in this place. For me, I didn't want to take photos of it. I didn't really want memories of it. And you were wandering around and you were going through the prison cells. And it was formerly a former high school that had been taken over and turned into this prison. And just the thousands of people that were taken to this prison and then killed in a very short period of time, bearing in mind the regime was only from 1975 to 1979. And there was 18,000 people that they believe went through this prison and didn't come out alive, which is a staggering amount of people. And there were pictures of the people. There were young children. There were mothers with their children. There were Westerners that had been captured. There were 3 people from New Zealand that had been tortured in this prison and then killed later on. And they started the killings at the prison in the first instance, but it became so much that they then took them off site and killed them off site because there just wasn't the space to do it in the prison. And then at the prison itself, at the museum itself, we actually met 3 of the survivors. There was only 12 people that were known to survive and not get killed whilst they were in that prison from over 18,000 people. And it was just so shocking. And we spoke to 2 gentlemen that were in their 90s as survivors, and we spoke to one chap that was in his early 50s that was a child that was in the prison, that when it actually came to be taken over, there were only 12 people left, which is crazy. And like I say, it's very difficult to think that actually for a lot of people listening to this podcast, that would have happened in their lifetime. And they actually think during the regime, the population of Cambodia was 8 million people, and they estimate that nearly 3 million people were killed during that time through genocide, which is just unbelievable. And actually, there are still people serving their life sentences in prison today. So we spent a few hours wandering around there, learning all about it, and obviously, you know about the Khmer Rouge regime, but trying to piece it all together. And it's, like I said last week on the Vietnam podcast, this trip, as well as seeing 2 amazing countries, was also just one massive history lesson. And you learn so much, and you can really, really understand the timeline of things that happened. Because there were, I knew a lot of it already, of the history, but kind of the timeline in my head was kind of really confused. I'd done quite a bit of research before I went, but it was only actually being there and learning about the timeline itself that it kind of all put it into place. Straight after we visited the S21, we then went to the killing field, which was probably about 15-20 minutes away from the prison. And that was a very, very weird feeling. Like, if you've ever been to Auschwitz, you probably would get the same feeling as going to this. And obviously they discovered it not that long ago in reality. And they'd done some excavations on it, but they've now left it very much as it was. They don't want to excavate it anymore. There were deep, deep graves in it. And, as you're wandering through, they've kind of got like a wooden bridge walkway through it, and you can see where all the mass graves were. And obviously, when you get the rainy season in Cambodia, and it all gets muddy, bits are still coming up through the soil. You can kind of see bits of the clothing, and things like that. The group, it's very hard to explain when you're wandering around, but the group were very quiet, taking it all in. And I think, it's to visit it is something that I don't think you will ever forget once you've been there, and kind of appreciate what those people would have gone through. And they've built a modern stupa memorial in the middle of the killing fields. And it's a very tall building. And they've got a glass case in the middle of it that literally goes all the way up to the ceiling. And inside it's just full of skulls from people that were murdered in the killing fields. And it's just difficult to reflect on it, really. And one thing that I will remember, I think, for a long, long, long time. And yeah, it's not a place that, you would probably want to constantly go back and visit. Seeing it once is enough. And, we kind of spent an hour wandering around the killing fields. And I think that was definitely enough. I mean, there was, there's a tree in the middle of the killing fields that they used to put a speaker in, and they played music while they were doing what they were doing to drown out the noise, so people living locally didn't know what was happening whilst it was there. So yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't a highlight of the trip, but I think, if you are going to Cambodia, then it's a place that you should visit to get the understanding of what the Cambodian people had to go through in our lifetime, which is frightening, really, that it was kind of allowed to happen in such recent times in reality. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard to comprehend. And then we kind of left there and all went and had a group dinner. And it was really interesting seeing the group dynamic with having that meal. And I think that the hardest thing for a lot of people to understand, and one thing that came out of Cambodia, was just how friendly the Cambodian people are. They were saying, Cambodia has one of the youngest populations in the world, and the majority of people in Cambodia are around the age of 25. And, when you actually think about that, you then think, well, actually, that's the reality of it. You think they've had to rebuild since 1979. They nearly lost 35% of their population coming out of that regime. And it is going to take time to rebuild. And, you like I say, it's just really difficult to comprehend that this happened in such recent times on such a massive, massive scale. The group, once we'd done that, we decided to have, give the group some free time to go back to the hotel and have their own time to reflect, do their own thing. And then we spent the afternoon then doing a sunset boat trip up through the river. And it was interesting to, Phnom Penh, the capital, obviously the capital used to be Seim Reap, but the capital was moved to Phnom Penh. And to see the rebuild and to see the investment and to see the size of this city, coming out, the skyscrapers, the investment that's going into it, the buildings, the modern town that it is, has all come very, very recently. And we had somebody on the trip actually who had come with her partner to Cambodia on this trip, but she'd already been to Vietnam and Cambodia. And she said, like, the change that she has seen in the 20 years since she visited Cambodia was massive. So Phnom Penh is definitely on the list, and is definitely a place that you should go and visit. Like I said, we went and did the boat trip, finished the boat trip, came back. Probably we got back at about 7:00 in the evening. And then it was people's free time to go and have a wander around. People went and had some dinner. They went to the market. And they just had that time to kind of reflect on the day, really. The next day, it was up an early start because we were now heading to Seim Reap. And it's around about a 6-hour drive to get from Phnom Penh to Seim Reap. And the weird thing for me was the fact that when we were planning this trip is you couldn't fly. And to fly, you would have to have gone back to Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam and then do a 2-leg trip. So it was probably going to be quicker anyway, just to get the bus to take us up to Seim Reap. And the one thing about, and I never expected this, and the group certainly didn't expect this, was how luxurious our coach was going to be. It was literally like a VIP footballer's coach with massive reclining chairs. Everyone had loads of space. And, the journey just went, we just weren't in this hot, stuffy bus. And it just made it really nice to do it that way. And anyway, we got to Seim Reap, and we were very central in Seim Reap to everything. So people had the opportunity in the afternoon to go and have a wander around and just to explore really. And then in the evening we and one thing was Cambodia in April was super, super hot. I mean, most days were 40, but with the humidity, it was, it felt like 44, 45, 46 degrees. It was very, very warm. And then in the evening, we went and had a walking tour of the old town, and went and had a group dinner in Pub Street. And Pub Street is kind of the place that all the tourists sort of head to in Seim Reap. And I would say it is completely different to when you think of like the Koh Sam Road or Bar Street in Patong. It's a very different feel to those, in terms of it's built for the tourists. There's live music, there's families wandering around. It really was a sort of fun place to kind of visit. And then the next morning, then we didn't stay out too late that night, because the next morning we had a 4:30 start to go and do what obviously everybody wants to do when they go to Cambodia, and that's head to Angkor Wat. And we were hoping to be there to see the sunrise over Angkor Wat. And it wasn't the best sunrise, I will say, but we still did have a sunrise, and it was beautiful to see the temples and see Angkor Wat in its full glory. And obviously, it's a bucket list tick for a lot of people to head to Angkor Wat. We spent 3-4 hours in Angkor Wat having a look round, and to believe that place was built in the 12th, 13th century, and the detail that went into it is very, very hard to comprehend, is the one that it gets me. I always think, you look at Machu Picchu in South America, for example, which was built 200-300 years later than these temples. And Machu Picchu is a very, very basic block design, whereas, the temples in Southeast Asia just have such intricate detail into the carvings and everything. It certainly is amazing to see. When you're there in Seim Reap, the easiest way to get around is by tuk-tuk. And we had 7 tuk-tuks that basically took the group around for our sightseeing tour that day. So like I say, we started off in Angkor Wat, had a wander around there, saw the temple, got back to the tuk-tuks, and then we went to Angkor Thom and looked at the Bayon temple, which was so richly decorated, and obviously, it's a Buddhist temple, and there were lots of monks wandering around, going and visiting, and I personally enjoyed the Bayon temple more, I think, than I did Angkor Wat, and I know a few other people thought the same. And we spent a few hours. We probably spent another hour then having a wander around the Bayon temple. But then the surprise to most people was that out of Angkor Wat, the Bayon temple, we have one more temple to visit, which is what they class as the Lara Croft temple, or Ta Prohm, as it's more commonly known. But it's the temple that was used to shoot the Lara Croft movie Tomb Raider. And that temple has just kind of been left to nature. And there are trees just growing all over it. And everyone said, quite a lot of the group said that they enjoyed wandering around the Ta Prohm temple more than the other two, just because, nature had kind of taken over it, really. But, that was kind of, we finished and then went to have lunch again as a group. And we kind of finished the day then around about 1:30, 2 o'clock. And like I say, it was a really warm day. And everyone was so glad to get into the air-conditioned restaurant. But, we were so looked after by the tuk-tuk drivers. They'll bring out cold towels for you every time you went back. They'll give you cold bottles of water that they're keeping cold in ice. So everyone, and, once you got back on the tuk-tuk and you started going, it kind of, that little bit of breeze you were getting really did cool you down. So anyway, people had a free afternoon that day. And then a free evening as well to go and do their own thing, which with such an early start, it was kind of a pretty still full-on day. Again, the hotel we had in Seim Reap had a pool on the roof. So people went and chilled out there, had the afternoon. A few people went to the market shopping and just did what they wanted to do and spent the evening. Again, a few went down to the pub street, had a meal on pub street, went out for a few drinks, soaked up the atmosphere, listened to some live music. They just enjoyed their time doing what they wanted to do. And then the following day, then we had another early-ish start because today we were doing a 20-kilometer cycle ride around Seim Reap. And we were kind of driven again by tuk-tuk 15, 20 minutes out of Seim Reap. Where we picked up our bikes. And I will say the quality of the mountain bikes out there, if you're hiring bikes, is really, really good. We had some lovely trek bikes, well looked after. They weren't rickety old things. And we cycled around one of the lakes and met some local Cambodian families who, they were distilling rice wine. One was making rice noodles. Another was making sticky rice in bamboo. And the lovely thing about it was it wasn't there for the tourists. These things happened, and the tour and part of the tour was going and visiting the reality of what actually happened. So many times when you go on tours, things are put on for tourists, and it seems very, very put on, but this wasn't put on. This was their everyday local life that you just got the chance to go around and see. Again, it was super, super hot. It was quite nice while she was cycling around. Everyone was kind of a bit worried about cycling, how hot it was going to be, but actually you did get a bit of a breeze from cycling about. And again, we had a couple of tuk-tuks following us. So if you decided that, you didn't want to cycle anymore, or you kind of had enough, or you were too hot, you could have jumped on the tuk-tuk. And again, the tuk-tuk drivers had fresh fruit, they had cold water, they had cold towels. And then we did a final loop around this big lake. And again, we're finished by kind of 11 o'clock. And then people had an afternoon then to go back out, chill out, have a shower, cool down. Again, some went to the pool, some went for a massage, some went back to the markets to get their last bits of souvenirs. And then we finished the evening off then with a final group dinner in Seim Reap. And the nice thing about the group dinners out there is they call them family sharing dinners. So a lot of the time it's a set menu, and between four of you, they'll bring out 3, 4, 5 different dishes, and then you can all help yourself to what you want, kind of buffet style, which is such a lovely way to eat. After the group dinner, people again kind of did their own thing, went back to pub street, went back to the hotel, had a few drinks. But obviously it was going to be a long day the next day because we were getting up early to head back to the UK, flying from Seim Reap, direct them back to Singapore. Now, Seim Reap has got a new airport. A lot of money, £1 billion have been spent on this airport. The original airport was about a 15-minute tuk-tuk ride from Seim Reap to the international airport. The new airport they've built is about an hour away. I think it's probably would go down as one of the nicest airports I've been in recently. It's this massive airport and currently has very few flights. They are definitely planning for the future in Seim Reap. I've never been through check-in so quickly, security so quickly. It was just an absolute dream. If every airport could be like that, traveling would be so much easier. But we got our flight, 2-hour flight from Seim Reap to Singapore. And then we did actually have a very long layover in Singapore. And a few of us decided that we were going to head out to, we were going to actually exit the airport, and there's a quick health form you've got to fill out, but it's a very easy process. If you ever get a layover in Singapore, it's a very easy process to step out and go and have a look at Singapore if you've never been, because it's a lovely city, very, very clean. And very enjoyable. And a few people wanted to go to the home of the Singapore Sling, which is Raffles Hotel, and grab themselves a Singapore Sling and sit there and soak it up. And that's kind of what a few of us did. A few others went and had a tour, went and had a tour of the airport, and there are some tours that you can go and do. A few people went to the bay and had a look at the light show that they do at the bay. And then we kind of all made our way back to Singapore Airport then. But there is so much stuff to do in Singapore Airport as well. Singapore Airport's got a cinema. It's got a swimming pool. There is so much to do in Singapore. Changi Airport is a very, very nice airport to spend some time in. Really easy to get between the different terminals. So if you are looking to transit through a hotel, through an airport at any time, then please, really do consider Singapore Airways, because it's a great airport to visit. And then we got back to the UK, and that was the end of the trip. Obviously, it is a 13-hour flight from Singapore back to the UK. But again, if you want to be visiting Southeast Asia, you need to be prepared to sit on a plane for a very, very long period of time. So it's just kind of, like I say, when people want to go to Peru, when they want to go to Nepal, when they, that is part and parcel of it. So anyway, that was part 2 of this podcast, looking at the trip that we did, traveling from Vietnam and Cambodia. Both countries, completely worth a visit. People are asking, did you have a favorite Cambodia or Vietnam? I think if I had to choose, it would be Cambodia, just mainly because of the people, just because they were so friendly. And yeah, would I go back with it? Definitely. I would be there within a heartbeat. Both countries. I cannot wait to go back and do another tour with another group. It was such a great trip. It was the first time we'd run that trip at the Bucket List Company. And the only thing, I don't think I'd change anything from the trip. If you want, it was a very, very quick whistle stop tour. I'll give you that. It was very much move. There was lots of hotels to stay in. But we did tick off the best of Vietnam and Cambodia. I think the only change that I'm going to make is potentially to put in another completely different tour of both. Keep that trip for those who want the whistle stop, and then maybe look at doing a separate Vietnam itinerary and a Cambodia itinerary, because there is still more stuff to see or to spend more time there. But obviously, if people want to tick both off within one trip, then this was the perfect trip to do so. So that's my episode this week. Hopefully that's given you a lowdown on what we did in Cambodia. But if you've never been, get it added to your bucket list very, very quickly. So that's it from me this week. I'll be back with another episode next week. And until then, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.